We're at 32 attendees, so thank you all for joining us. So just to be clear what today is, so I'm not going to teach people how to do urban search and rescue, and this is not going to be a, here's what you should do as a CERT member. Instead, what I'm going to talk about today is how search and rescue units work particularly in California, because that's what I know the most about. And I'll try to answer any other questions that I can. So this is really how search and rescue teams operate. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, the kind of search and rescue teams and sort of what's involved. And I basically encourage you to ask questions. I'm happy to take them as they go along. So you can either ask them in the Q&A section, and then I'll just verbally try to answer them, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and then you can talk. And I'm happy to have people ask questions as we go along. You don't have to wait until the very end as far as I'm concerned. So with that as the introduction, I'm Craig Taylor. I've been with the local CERT group for 30 plus years. I'm a member of the Bay Area Mountain Rescue Unit called BAMRU. We're one of the Type 1 mountain rescue teams in California. And so what I want to start with is talk about the different kinds of search and rescue. And then I'm going to kind of drill down pretty quickly into ground searchers, and the mountain rescue is part of sort of ground. So, within search and rescue, you've got ground searchers, you've got mountain search and rescue, which is just basically a subset of ground searchers. You've got cave, which is also specialized. You've got urban SAR, which is typically you hear it as USAR. You've got things like, and you've got air, and you've got maritime. I'm really only going to talk about ground and mountain today. The urban USAR stuff, we're fortunate in Menlo Park. We've got one of the big nationwide USAR teams in our area. So that's actually pretty cool. And if you ever have an opportunity post-COVID to go visit, I think they occasionally give tours of their facility, and it's a pretty slick place. So with that, let me talk about basically ground searching, and from now on, I'm just going to call it SAR, SAR, which is search and rescue. So ground SAR is primarily, at least in California, organized by county. Obviously, there are some national parks like YOSAR is in Yosemite National Park, and they deal mostly with rescuing rock climbers off the cliffs within the valley itself. But within California, SAR is considered a law enforcement activity. And so search and rescue teams are affiliated with a sheriff's office. So in the case of BAMRU, we're sort of different than most search and rescue organizations in the sense that we cover all of the Bay Area in terms of our membership, but we're sponsored by the San Mateo County Sheriff. So they are our sponsoring agency, and we appreciate their sponsorship. So with that, what I'd say is that in California, almost all search and rescue are what we call professional volunteers. In other words, what happens is you put a lot of time and money into it, but you're not paid. There are some paid professionals. YOSAR would be an example of that. But in California, that's pretty limited. Almost everybody is basically a volunteer with sheriff deputies that typically will train with search and rescue teams. And obviously, as a deputy, they're paid. So the different kinds of search and rescue that I want to talk about today is I want to start by talking about kind of how they're typed. And in California, we have types 1 through 4, and then we have dog teams. And so type 1 is basically the highest trained search and rescue. Typically, they're deployed above 7,000 feet, so they're high altitude. They're independent for 3 days, so you can call on a type 1 team and say, I need you to go to the top of Mount Whitney, and I'm going to drop you guys off, and we'll try to come back and get you in 3 days. And you can expect that a type 1 team will go, great, we're ready to do that. And they come prepared with their own food for a 3-day independent deployment. We also provide high angle technical rescue, and that basically implies that we bring the gear that we need to do a rescue. So in our particular area, there's something called the Mountain Rescue Association. It's nationwide, and we're part of the California region. And Mountain Rescue basically has 3 disciplines that we train in. First is high angle, which is typically what you think about as rock. So it's rock climbing and basically rescuing climbers. The second one is snow and ice. So that's going to be glacier and basically snow. And the third one is what we call wilderness search, which is basically in the wilderness. And it also includes what we call search management, which is basically preparing to run a search. So that's typically a type 1. And within that specialized type 1, there's mountain rescue, and that's what BAMRU is. BAMRU is a mountain rescue accredited team. Then you have type 2, which is typically, they can usually go out for a couple of days, lower angle. Type 3 is usually like 1 long day in the wilderness. And then type 4 is typically going to be urban. So, if type 4 would be somebody who says, I can come to a park and help find, a lost kid or something. That would be type 4. All the other types, basically, you can deploy them into the wilderness. In terms of dogs, there's different kinds of dogs. So when you go and call for a dog team, you want to be specific about what you're looking for. And so what you end up with is there are trailing and tracking dogs. They're pretty similar. The difference is a tracking dog literally follows the person step by step. A trailing dog follows a scent, but basically can sort of short circuit it and moves a little bit faster. So that's the tracking trailing dogs. Then you have air scent dogs, which are much more kind of what you expect a dog to do, is they pick up the scent of a human. And so the difference between a trailing dog and an air scent dog is trailing dog, you give it a scent article and it follows the scent for that person. An air scent dog basically gets out in the field and says, if I can smell any people anywhere, they'll take you to those people. So, they can be good in limited places where you're trying to move over a bigger area and it's not contaminated with a bunch of people. But once you get a bunch of searchers around, unfortunately, air scent dogs will find all the searchers, but not necessarily the person that you're looking for. And then finally, there are cadaver dogs, and they're specially trained to be able to basically smell for decomposing bodies as effectively. And so they can actually, both on the surface and below ground, pick up scent. So I see one hand is raised. Carol, could you unmute Carol?
Hi, I was wondering if you could spell these acronyms like BAMRU. It's a little confusing for me.
Sure. So BAMRU, sorry, I work with the group all the time. So Bay Area Mountain Rescue Unit is what BAMRU is an acronym for.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so that's the different kinds of ground searching that you can expect. And basically the way that searches are organized is they all go through typically within the county. Let me back up. So there's kind of 2 ways that searches get started. They get started either within the county or they get started outside of the county. So within the county, what would happen is, somebody would call 911. The 911 would contact the sheriff, and the sheriff would contact search and rescue within the county. We'd send a team out, and we do initially what we call hasty. What a hasty team typically does is you try to get out there and you get going as quickly as you can. So you basically put 2 or 3 people on a trail and you send them out, and they're moving quick. So they're typically walking faster, running, stopping occasionally, shouting, but they continue to move. And what you're trying to do is kind of get beyond where the person's likely to be. And what happens in a search is the more hours that go by, the larger the area you have to search. So if you think about a circle and the radius of a circle, and you figure that somebody can move, depending on how healthy they are, between 1 and 2 miles an hour. If they're particularly fit, certainly mountaineers and stuff, they could be doing 3 miles an hour. That means the radius of your circle is increasing by 2 miles every hour. So every hour you wait, you have that, the area that you're trying to cover is that much larger. And so, after a few hours, you're basically into what we call a campaign search, because you're going to have to call in more people. No one search team is going to be able to find a person once they've been gone more than a few hours. So what you hope with the hasty is, you try to pick out the major trails that they might be on, and you send people out there, and you try to contain that search. You try to get to places, sort of choke points, if you will, where if they're wandering around, you can catch them. Or if they just happen to be walking back on the trail and they're late, then you immediately find them and you can call the search off. So that's the first, what we call operation period, or OP0. And so, OP0, ideally, that's when you find somebody because they were only kind of lost. They weren't sort of hurt, or they hadn't been gone for a long period of time. Once you move past OP0, you move into what we call operation period 1 through N. And those you start thinking about what we call mutual aid. And mutual aid is when you start calling for teams outside your area. And that happens pretty rapidly. So within about the first 4 hours, you're already planning to bring more people in. Because the reality is, beyond the initial team getting there within the county, the next team's probably realistically, by the time they get notified in the late afternoon, early evening, and they show up, they're probably going to show up the next morning. So if you're ever lost and you're expecting search and rescue to show up, my advice is sort of be patient, that realistically, they're not going to show up at 9 o'clock at night to rescue you, because it just takes longer than that to get the teams ready and deployed. So that's kind of the rhythm. And then once you start OP1, typically an operation period is 8 hours, and we just keep going. And depending on the circumstances, sometimes we'll do them at night, sometimes we'll wait until the next day. And that depends a lot on what we think the risk is to the individual. So if it's a particularly young person, young kid, or somebody who's older, and it's going to be, say, a cold night out, then we're probably going to search through the night and just keep going. Whereas if it's somebody that we think probably, it's a hiker, they probably have a jacket and stuff, it's going to be 40, but it's not going to be below freezing. Then what we take into account is the safety of the searchers. Because one of the sort of primary tenets of search and rescue is basically it's rescuer safety first. In other words, having a rescuer have to be rescued, we call that an incident with an incident, is something we try to avoid at all costs. So you really never want to put rescuers in any more risk or hazard than you have to. So that's kind of the rhythm. So then once you get started, then these things, you keep having operational periods, you keep making new plans, and we call them search assignments. And all searches are organized around the ICS system. So, everything that you guys know, you have an ops chief, a planning chief, you have an incident commander. And so all our operations are all, organized around that basic tenet. And so the idea is that in search and rescue, unlike fire is very ops heavy, and search and rescue tends to be very planning heavy. So you tend to get out, you get a team together in your incident command post, and they start making plans. Like they start looking at the terrain, they get information about the subject that they're looking for, and then they start writing what we call search assignments. Some of them might be, go out this trail, follow a linear feature, go out this ridge, go down this valley. Other times they're area searches where, we need you to cover this area. So we basically organize the search based on what we know about the person. So I've got a question here: can people be found using devices like phone that they're carrying? So the answer is yes. If you're within range of a cell phone tower, then through the sheriff's office, we can triangulate somebody's cell phone. The problem in the wilderness is usually it's hilly. They're usually farther away from towers. So sometimes we can find people by phone, like up in Marin, we can often use it. And we can also tell the last place that their phone was pinged by a tower, meaning the last time their phone communicated with the tower. So that gives us some idea of where to look. And that can be important because sometimes somebody, we get a 911 call that says, well, my significant other, they went out for a hike. And they're like, and they left this morning. And we don't know when they left exactly. We have a rough idea, and we have no idea where they went because they didn't tell anybody. And so sometimes we get lucky and we're able to say, well, the last place that they were pinged was at this location. And then the sheriff will typically go out there and start looking for their car, because that's usually the thing that gives us a starting point. And that becomes pretty critical because it's really hard to do a search unless you have what we call a last known location. And if you don't have that, it's very, very difficult to find somebody. So I was talking about search assignments. So we give out search assignments, and then these searches continue, and they basically get larger and larger. I'm also trying to answer these. So point last seen is basically slightly different. The point last seen is somebody has told us, and it's called PLS, has told us they saw this person. So there's last known, and then and they're very closely related, but slightly different. So we write up search assignments, we continue with these operations, and eventually these things get large. And when they're larger, we call them campaign searches. And that typically means that they've been going on for multiple days, and we'll have hundreds of searchers and 10 to 30 different search and rescue teams actually involved. Typically, that's where you've got helicopters involved, we've got vehicles involved. And so campaign searches require a lot more logistics and a lot more planning. And you'll see, some of the big searches, and I'll talk about a few of those at the end. I'll talk about some campaign searches that I've been on. So that gives you a little bit of a sense for kind of searches and how they evolve. And again, when we get to sort of open Q&A, I'm happy to answer any questions that people have. I've got a question here. Do people, searchers work in teams of 2? And the answer is 2 is the minimum. Usually they're larger than that. Usually they're more like 4. The hasty teams are sometimes 2, where we're just going fast. But the reason you want a larger team is if you do find your subject and they need medical assistance, then typically 2 people is less, is almost too small a team to be able to effectively deal with an injured subject. So then I wanted to touch briefly on training and just kind of what's involved, what sort of the different volunteer teams do. And then I'll talk a little bit about BAMRU specifically, then I'll talk about some searches, and then I'll just answer questions. And I've also got another question here. What advice do you give to people that find themselves lost or injured to help increase the likelihood of searchers can find you? So that's a great question. Let me just try to answer that now. So the first thing you can do is, and you've heard, everybody hopefully has heard this before, is tell people where you're going. Like, that's the most important thing you can do, because if we know what trailhead to start looking for you, and we know what you are planning to do, like if you're planning to climb a peak or hike out to a lake, then that limits the size of the initial search and gives us a much better chance of finding you, because we can concentrate our early resources, which are usually pretty limited, to the most likely area that we're going to find you. So that's the first thing that you can do. You can also carry these days, you can carry locator devices. They've gotten pretty inexpensive. You've got the Garmin InReaches, you've got various other devices. We, in search and rescue, typically like Garmin and some of the other ones that are what are called two-way communication, because that way you can say, I need help, and you can tell us what kind of help you need. Because one of the problems we've had with the spots in the past is somebody pushes, I need help. And then what ends up happening is we don't really know what they need. So we have to assume the worst. We have to assume that they're injured, that they're not mobile. And so we need to prepare for that. It takes us longer to prepare for that. Whereas if what you really need is I'm just kind of lost or I'm late or whatever, then we can put out a smaller team and focus on sort of the immediate issue. So here's an example. I'll just put this up here. Here's an InReach Mini. These things are super light, and they do have a yearly subscription, so they're not inexpensive. But if you do much stuff in the backcountry, they really are a great thing to have, because it makes, again, it's much easier for us to find you because they generate a GPS location. So that lets us really zero in and get help to you as quickly as possible. Now, assuming you don't have all that stuff, the next best thing you can do is try to stay near a trail, because we're going to look first along trails. The next thing you can do is stay along what we call a linear feature. And a linear feature is going to be typically a ridge or a valley or a creek, because that's where people tend to gravitate. If you've been out for days, you're either going to try to get high because you're lost and you're trying to see where you are, or you're going to go low, either trying to figure out a way out or looking for water. So trying to get yourself to one of those linear features, if you can't get yourself to a trail, is always a good thing to do. So that would be sort of the next thing. And then the next thing is make yourself as visible as possible. You would think that if you're in a helicopter and people think, oh, I put out an orange blanket and it's 3 by 3. I can tell you that, I've been out on a search in a helicopter, and it is incredibly difficult to see things from a helicopter. You would think that you could it's like, you're just walking around and you can see everything. But the reality is quite difficult to see things. So anything you can do to help make yourself visible is a huge help. Now, there's a bunch of stuff going by on the chat here. I'm not following all of it, so we may have to come back to some of this stuff. But yeah, so he see PLBs. PLBs are one way. And PLBs are also things that are used, airplanes, it's sort of the equivalent. And on boats, there's the sort of the equivalent. They use a slightly different system. The nice thing is to get the GPS, but again, the reason I'd recommend something like the Garmin is that it's two-way. And that lets us, tell you that we got the message, that we're on our way, when you can expect us, and it lets you tell us what you need. And so those two things make two-way communication really a significantly better way of dealing with that stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna talk a little bit about training, and then I'm happy to keep coming back and answering these questions. So on the training, it really depends on the team. Type 1 teams train significantly more than type 2 or type 3 teams. So in our case, the type 1 and type 2 teams, particularly the MRA teams, we do joint exercises in the Bay Area, and we do monthly trainings, monthly all-day trainings. So it's 8 to 10 hours to potentially 16 hours a month of training, and we train in technical systems, both low angle and high angle systems, as well as first aid and navigation. So I'm trying to think what else is interesting. One of the things that might be interesting for people is to understand for the type 1, the technical teams, the technical systems that we build. So, it's what you think of as ropes and pulleys and the like. but they're built in a particular way because when you're going to rescue somebody, it's considered poor form to injure the subject that you've rescued. And as you can imagine, if you were somebody who's being rescued, the last thing you'd want is a team that was actually going to get you hurt. So when we build a technical system, they're built to a much higher standard than any system that you would use for, say, personal rock climbing. And so one of the things that we do is when we build a system, we have 3 tests that we apply to every system that we do. One of them is called a whistle test. And the whistle test is when a system has been built and it's deployed, operating, if everybody lets go of the rope, the system has to break itself. I mean, it has to automatically stop itself. It can't depend on a human being. And the reason we do that is imagine that somebody got hit by falling rock and let go of the rope. You don't want the system to then fail because somebody's no longer holding onto the rope. So the whistle test is everybody could let go of the systems and the system is still stable and reliable. And the way we do that is all the systems all have special pulleys that as the rope comes through them, they lock so they don't it doesn't sort of go back through the system. So that's one of the things that we use on all of our systems. The next thing is what we call a whiteboard, and whiteboarding is where we do an analysis of the system that we've built. And so that's looking at all the pulleys that are in the system, all the anchors that are in the system, and looking at the loads that we're going to put on the system. So we basically calculate for the webbing, the anchors, the rope itself, any pulleys, any knots, all those things change how much weight the system can hold. And so we'll typically build our systems to what's called a 2 kilonewton standard. And 2 kilonewtons is around 450 pounds. So that's sort of that's a rescuer and a subject. That's our sort of typical system. And then we build that to 10x. So we basically build all our systems to a 20 kilonewton actual load. And that lets us deal with dynamic shock on the system, et cetera. And then the last one is what we call a critical points failure. And so we try to build all the systems we have. So if you were to cut a rope, break a carabiner, break a pulley, break an anchor, if you broke any single point in the system would still survive and function. And so the way we do that is with redundancy. So we have 2 ropes. So every system we build has got 2 ropes on it, and there is no single point in the system that relies on one connection. So that's kind of the way we build technical systems, and that's sort of how they're different than your sort of run-of-the-mill systems that you say a rock climber would use. So I think that's all I was going to say about searches and training and some of the stuff that we do. If you've got questions, now might be a good time to ask them, and then I'll go in and talk about a few of the searches that I've been involved on that were interesting, and then we'll just open it up with just any other questions that you have. So if you want to raise your hand, now would be a good time, or if you want to put a question in the Q&A. So I've got one, most dramatic or unusual rescue, so I'll get to that one. What do you think the best two-way locator available? So, I mean, I like Garmin, but I think, you know, there are other ones that work. Garmin works on the Iridium system, so it's basically pretty reliable. So I'm not here to give an endorsement to anybody's, you know, commercial products, but that's what I personally use. All right, what are good ways to be visible to searchers? So wear bright clothes. If you carry a space blanket with you, you know, if it's a sunny day, a space blanket sort of reflecting in the sun is something that, you know, we can often see because, you know, it's much like a mirror. If you've got a mirror that you can reflect, particularly when we're out, you know, we're going to be calling or we're going to be blowing whistles. And if you hear that stuff, you know, try to make yourself visible in the direction that you hear those shouts coming from, or those whistles coming from is a great way to help make yourself more visible. But again, anything you can do to put up bright colors. If it's snow, you can stamp out messages in the snow. One thing I would tell you is, again, you're most likely in the snow going to be seen from the air. It means this, whatever you put in, there's got to be big. Like the letters have got to be at least 6 feet high. So hopefully that helps. Other questions? All right, so let me go on and talk about a few of the searches. I'm going to talk about these in somewhat general terms. One of the things about searches is they're all considered law enforcement confidential. So I can talk about what's been in the newspapers. I can't talk about anything that I know of from personally being on the search, but that wasn't published. So they'll be a little bit, they may be a little bit vague. I got a question here, LED flares effective? Sure, and especially at night. LED flares can be very effective. Not everybody carries them, but if you've got a headlamp, most headlamps have a flashing mode on them. And again, if it's night and you hear a call or you hear low-flying helicopter or an airplane, then that's a great time to get that stuff out. Even surprisingly enough, something like a lighter, because at night, if you're in the dark at night and I'm in a helicopter and I'm hanging out the door looking, it's amazing how just a flashlight or even just somebody holding up their lighter shows up like a beacon, and we're able to home in on that. So yeah, any kind of light at night is extremely effective. Okay, so let's see. So I've got 3 or 4 searches that I can talk about. So the first one I thought I might talk about is the search on Mount Whitney. And what I would say is for BAMRU, our sort of thing is our sort of motto is, anytime, anywhere. For a type means, season, weather, and we'll basically go out anytime, and basically we'll go any place in the state of California. Excuse me. Our typical range, I would say, is sort of Shasta to Whitney. We've gone down to Southern California, down in like the Mount Baldy area recently. Those are, if we go to something like that, it's definitely a campaign search, because that means it's been going for days, because by the time they call us, they started to exhaust their options, and they, literally that's where they need like 100 or 200 people out searching for the day. And so, and particularly if it's winter and like a Mount Baldy, there are we had a lot of teams down there for that. So anyway, our range is typically Whitney to Shasta, because we can get there in basically a day, or kind of a long, overnight haul. And one of the things we'll often do is get, one person to, do the driving and everybody else sleeps. Because again, since searcher safety is sort of paramount, one of the things we do want to be careful is you don't end up having rescuers basically driving exhausted. And that implies that on the way back, we often will have people spend an extra night and just get a little bit more sleep before they jump in their car to try to come home. Because the reality is the driving to and from the searches is actually the most dangerous thing that we do. So the Mount Whitney search that I was going to talk about was a church group that left from Whitney Portal. They wanted to climb Mount Whitney. They didn't get a permit for the standard route. So instead they got a permit for the Mountaineers route. And I don't think they understood exactly where the Mountaineers route was, because by the time we got called in, they had found some of the people in a sort of different area up between Russell and Whitney. And their story was they had gotten this far, they decided it was too hard and too dangerous, and they basically stayed there and called for help. They were rescued from that location, but their leader decided to go on. And that was what our search was for. We were searching for the leader. So we spent several days. We had Chinook helicopters. So the National Guard comes in typically on these things and brings Chinooks. We also have Blackhawks. And so the Blackhawks are good for aerial searching and can hold, sort of depending on elevation, 6 to 8 people. The Chinooks, again, depending on elevation, can hold 15 to 30 people. There's sort of a joke within search and rescue that Chinooks are the helicopters that look a little bit like a banana. They've got basically rotors on both ends. But the joke is that they actually don't fly. They just beat the air into submission. And if you've ever been anywhere near a Chinook, even when you have earplugs in and ear protection over your ears, you feel like somebody is pounding on your head when you're in the thing. I mean, when they take off, it's just literally this beast just kind of pulls itself off the ground and then off it goes. And, this is something that you can put a small tank in and fly, and they put Jeeps and other stuff. So, I mean, a Chinook is, capable of carrying, a large amount of cargo, in our case, a large number of searchers, or in something like the Whitney search, they can carry us to high altitude. So they're able to carry us above 14,000 feet. So I got some questions here. I'm going to hold for the Q&A. I'm going to finish talking about this search and then I can come back to those. So we were deployed basically on the mountain, dropped off and asked to basically search the north side of Whitney, which involved basically climbing some pretty steep class 3, class 4 terrain. Worked our way through that, spent the night, and then we're basically redeployed over on the west side and basically searched our way up. If you're familiar with Mount Whitney, sort of near Guitar Lake and sort of up toward Mount Russell. Eventually, we did find the missing person. He was deceased, and he had tried to climb down and had taken a fall. And that is the reality of search and rescue, that it is often search and recovery. We are overjoyed when it is search and rescue, but particularly on the big searches that have been going on for 3 weeks, 3 days to 2 weeks, often at that point it means, something, the person is either seriously injured and, they just can't get out, or they are deceased and we're just trying to find them and bring closure to the family. So that's kind of what, happens there. Now, somebody was asking the question about, what was one of the most notable ones. I don't know if you guys remembered all the big wildfires that we had over in Kings Canyon. I want to say 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now. The air quality was awful. And we had a search out of Kings Canyon. The woman had been missing for 10 days. She had gotten separated from her group, and we were pretty sure we were just, looking for, her as a deceased person, but we were determined that we were going to keep looking. And after 10 days, we found her. She had fallen off a small cliff, basically sprained or broken both ankles, had dragged herself to water, pumped a liter of water, drank a liter, dragged herself back over by a tree, and basically just kind of cuddled up and stayed warm. And she did that for 10 days. And when we found her, she was incredibly, I don't want to say chipper, but she was like, great, I'm so glad to see you guys. You wouldn't have known that she had been there for 10 days. And it was incredible. And kudos to her. She did exactly the right thing. She stayed calm. She kept herself hydrated. Because as you probably all know, you can live a long time without food, but you can't live a long time without water. So she did exactly the right thing. And we found her after 10 days. And that's thrilling, because like I said, when you're sort of expecting that it's it feels like, maybe, maybe not, that it's great when you find them. And we found some hunters, I mean, not bamboo specifically, but there's been some hunters. He was gone, I think, 24 days, and he was found and he was still alive. And he did the same thing. He went down a ravine and found water and basically made sure he kept drinking, and eventually was found. So, we're going to keep searching. And so if you're out there, what you need to do is you need to keep yourself alive. So that's Whitney. That's Kings Canyon. Let's see. Another search that we did in the relative recent past was we did one in the American River, where again, because we're a type 1 team, they were willing to say, well, we've got some really steep, cliffy areas that drop into the American River. So we're going to drive you out to the edge of the cliff. We're going to basically leave you guys to work your way down these ravines and stuff. And when you get down into the American River, we're sending a helicopter down to pick you up, which was awesome because after dropping, 2,000+ feet through really treacherous terrain, the idea of trying to go back up through there was going to be pretty tough. So that was pretty exciting. We didn't find that person. That's just the way it goes sometimes. But we did our best. So those kind of give you a sense for the type of searches that we do. I can talk about more if people are interested, but let me try to answer a few of the questions that are coming in. So let's see. What should we carry to protect us from potential wild animals? So I would say the reality is if you're in the Sierra, there's really not much in the Sierra that's going to take much interest in you as a human. I mean, if you got a stick or something and you're beating it, they're going to go away. I mean, they're not going to come and aggressively try to attack you. If you're up in Alaska, it's a different story. But if you're really concerned about it, you can get bear spray. It's a form of pepper spray basically, and you can buy that stuff at REI. One thing I would warn you is typically you can't take it on airplanes and stuff. So it's stuff you can put in your car, it's stuff you can put in your pack. But I have to say, for all the trips that I do, I don't take any additional precautions. If for some reason you're really worried about it, separating your food, particularly if you have a lot of smelly food, then you might try to keep that food slightly distanced from kind of where you are. Okay, so the next question is a rescued person financially liable and who pays for it? So in the United States, and certainly within the mountain rescue community, we don't charge people. We're technically allowed to. The county agencies can, and very rarely they might charge somebody if they thought it was really egregious. But the reason we don't charge people is we want to come rescue people. We want to make sure that if people think that they need help, that they call for help and they don't go, oh, I don't know, I might not be able to afford this. Helicopters are expensive and, I can't afford to get, charged $10,000 or $20,000. And then they don't ask for help and then they end up dying out there. Well, that's not okay. That's not why we do this job. So it's, for us, we make it a point of not charging. And that's true of almost all the agencies. I mean, unless they felt like you were calling for search and rescue and you didn't need it and you knew you didn't need it. I mean, but, the chances of that, we're talking of, 1/1000th of 1% or something. I mean, that sort of doesn't happen. So I've never had to deal with that. So the answer, the basic answer is no, we don't charge. If you need help, we're going to come help you. I think the worst thing I've heard is in the Grand Canyon, there were a group of backpackers who had a spot. They triggered the spot. It was one way. The rangers got out to them and it turned out they needed water. They had run out of water. And so what they may not have realized is, although one ranger showed up, behind them was this entire system, and there were probably 80 people that had been revved up and were already moving toward them as this ranger got to them. And then at that point, they call off the search and they gave them water. Well, a couple of days later, the same group hit their spot button and the rangers came out there again and they said, we need water, we're out. At which point the ranger said, enough of this. We're putting you on a helicopter and we're taking you out. You are no longer going to stay in the park. Now, they didn't charge them for that, but they did cut their trip short. So that's about the worst I've seen. Most of the time when people, if it's 911 call, somebody's missing, it's legit. Or if somebody calls for help, it's legit. So that's kind of where we're at. What kind of jobs do searchers have such they can take off 10 to 24 days with no notice? Well, that's a good question. Most searchers don't take off 10 to 24 days. Usually, although the campaigns may run for that long, individual searchers, as an individual searcher, you'd be exhausted if you were out there for 10 days straight. So the way it works is we rotate teams in and out, and we rotate people within the teams. So in our team, what we'll do is we page everybody saying that, there's a search, you need to be at this location at 7 a.m. And then people respond with whether they're available or not. And we do that for every operational period. And so we'll typically send people and they'll go out for 1 to 3 operational periods. And then at that point, typically they'll come home and we'll send other people and we'll keep rotating. And that's what almost all the teams do. When we had the campfire, we had teams rotating through there. There we were doing much more USAR, urban search and rescue stuff. And that was, truly exhausting because it was smoky. It was a really tough environment to spend much time in. And so there, after 2 days, you were kind of toast. You had been breathing smoke for 2 days. Everything you owned, every vehicle you were in smelled like a campfire. But yeah, so people typically don't take 10 to 24 days off. But that said, most people who are in search and rescue have an agreement with their job that they can leave kind of a notice and be gone. And, again, we're a volunteer group. And so we don't insist that, you have to come. But what we do say is, we put it out there and then people respond. And then most people try to respond whenever they can. All right, what's my most cherished piece of gear? Well, that's a tough question. So I'm not sure I'd say I have a piece of gear. So this is from Selena. Selena, are you asking a piece of search and rescue gear? Or are you asking a piece of gear that I carry with me all the time? Because I've got a search pack that I carry, this loaded up and ready to go. But maybe that's my cherished piece of gear, but it's a pack and it's got a lot of stuff in it. All right, so
yeah, that's a good example. I was thinking, yeah, something like that, or maybe something you would, never leave without. That's not necessarily required for you to have, just something that, it just makes it better for you.
Well, like I said, in the search and rescue model, I've always got my pack packed and ready so that when we call them call outs. When there's a search, we get a call out and we respond. And I've got that packed and ready to go. In terms of stuff that I carry personally that people might or might not think about is I carry a little bivy sack. In addition to the 10 essentials, I've got a little Mylar bivy sack. It doesn't weigh much more than a space blanket, and you can get completely inside it. And if you're going to spend a night or 2 or 3 out waiting for a team to come find you, then it's a good thing to have. Because as I mentioned earlier, the reality is if you're lost, by the time somebody notices that you're missing, it's usually late afternoon. Then they call 911, then it's the local sheriff. Then if it's going to be a larger group, it goes up to Cal OAS and then comes back down as mutual aid. to the various teams. So we often don't get paged until like 2 o'clock in the morning. So, the earliest we're going to get to a command post is at 7 in the morning. So chances are you're spending the night. So, one thing I would say is when I go out on a day hike, I am prepared to spend the night out. I never leave without a headlamp, my first aid stuff, and some ability, something to keep me warm for the night, whatever that means. Let's see, how many are part of your tier 1 team? So BAMRU has about 60 members, and at any one time, I'd say we can field a team of between 10 and 15 people. Okay, next question. What whistle do you use? What whistle do you use, and which one? So I use, I don't even know the name of it. It's a fairly large orange one. It's super loud. Like, it's so loud, you sort of cringe when you blow it. So I tend to, put my hand over my ear when I blow it, because I want it to be heard. So, these little ones that are on your pack things, I mean, you can sort of hear them. They have a slightly different pitch, but boy, they really don't go that far. So if you really want to have one, it's worth buying. Yeah, here we go. Somebody put Fox 40 whistle. I think that's probably right. Okay, what's the average age of search and rescue members? Well, that's a good question. So they're kind of all over the map. In BAMRU, I'd say the average age is around 30-ish, where we have a bunch of kind of 20-somethings, and then we have some, gray hairs like myself. So, but I mean, it skews younger because, I mean, you're on your own, it's 3 days, you're climbing 3,000 feet, you got a 40-pound pack on your back. So, you got to be in shape. And, as you get older, that becomes harder for people to maintain. All right, next question. What do you carry for food since you carry your own? That depends. Sometimes it's just, dehydrated Mountain House and the like. I dehydrate a bunch of my own food. So I got a little food stash that, I just throw in my pack, and all I need is boiling water and I'm good to go. Promax bars and things like that, protein bars that you can just nibble on are great. So, and then I got nuts. So again, like my search pack, I got a box of food that's got 3 days of food in it. So as soon as I get the call and they say, this is a call and we need you for at least 3 days, I throw that stuff in my pack. I grab my bars. I may grab some nuts, and I'm ready to roll. All right, so I don't see any more questions. Let's see. What do you use to communicate with? Great question. Thank you for asking that. So in BAMRU, we all have ham licenses. That's one of the requirements to be on the team. And so we use ham frequencies to talk within the team, but between the IC and the teams, there are what are called public safety channels. And so anybody who is a rescuer is allowed to be on those teams. A general member of the public is not allowed to use those. So these are public service frequencies, and they're used by police and fire and search and rescue. So that's basically the main. So if you show up at a search, one of the things you do is you get briefed, and they're going to tell you what frequencies are going to be used. And they've all, we've got in California, they're standardized. So our radios are all programmed with it. So you just flip it to that program channel. Let's see, what were you doing professionally and what got you interested in search and rescue? So I'm a software guy, but I've done a lot of backpacking, rock climbing, like pretty much forever. I mean, since I was in high school, probably started with scouts and kind of went from there. There's a question here, do you carry a small solar charger on your vest? I don't. They're extra weight. What I do is I just carry extra batteries. And so I've got sort of two forms of batteries that I carry. One, I've got a bunch of the envelope batteries, that are just AA, and I've got a charger. They're sitting in the charger. I charge them up, and they're ready to go. So they're in my pack. And the nice thing about those is they got a shelf life of about a year, and I think in a year they lose like 80% of their charge. Unlike normal rechargeables, that in a year they've lost a significant amount of charge. The other thing I bring are those little battery packs that you see that you can charge your phone and stuff with, because phones are turning out to be, more and more useful for a lot of the stuff they do. You can load maps on them, and if you can hit a cell phone tower, then you've got direct communication. And certainly the things in county, a lot of times if we've got something sensitive that we want to communicate back to the command post, if we've got a cell signal, we're going to call them on the phone and tell them what we've got rather than talk on the radio, because obviously the radio is open air. All right, what do you recommend hikers carry in terms of first aid? What determines when you end a search? So, everybody carries different things. I know doctors that all they do is, they carry ibuprofen with them. That seems a little extreme to me. It kind of depends on what you've got with you. If you've got stuff with you that you can do a splint, then it doesn't have to be in your first aid kit. But if you think about it, most of the time people get injured because they fall. And so it's some kind of sprain, or, they got stuck with something. So, having some gauze, having some, gauze pads and stuff that you can, clean a wound and bandage a wound, scrapes, and then basically something that, if you've got some kind of injury that you can splint it. Those are really the main things that you're dealing with. Because if you think about it, heart attacks and stuff like that, I mean, unless you've got special meds, as a hiker, you're not going to do anything about that stuff. So that would be my recommendation is first aid kits, they don't have to weigh 3 pounds. You can get by with a pretty minimal first aid kit, but definitely having some basic splinting is clearly important. Second part of your question is what determines when to end a search? That's really tough. So, obviously we end a search when we find somebody. So if we find them alive, then that's awesome, and we're really happy. And like I said, that happens some of the time. It doesn't happen as often as we like. When we find them deceased, obviously that'll end the search and we wrap things up. And then the next time we wrap it up is when we feel like we've covered the area and we really just don't have any more good information to drive the search. Because the problem is, sometimes you get in a situation where you might know where their car is, but they've been gone for 5 days, and you've been searching for 5 solid days. And so often what happens there is they'll suspend the search, and then we'll end up over the weekends because it's volunteers, it's easier to get volunteers to come out. And so we'll then often have the next, say, 3 weekends where we'll continue to search and maybe expand the search area and poke in the last few things. But at some point, what we do is keep all the GPS tracks and stuff. So we have a good map of where we have sent searchers. And at that point, when we feel like we've kind of exhausted our options, that's usually when we have to decide to call it. And that's done by the sheriff in the county that's doing the search. It's their call on whether they want to go on. And like I said, that's always a tough choice. Do you search if somebody's lost in the ocean? We don't. We're ground searchers. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, so there is like the Coast Guard would be primary, and the Navy. Those are sort of the primary units. Because you're looking at something very different when you're out in the ocean. Obviously you're not putting people on the ground. You're out there with helicopters and cutters looking for people. Okay, so that's all the questions I have. If you got any more, don't hesitate to raise your hands.
There's a couple in the chat, Craig.
There are a couple in the chat. Okay, sorry. Let me close the Q&A and look in the chat. Okay, let's see. Will I be publishing a book? Probably not in any time soon. I'm completely rebuilding my house, so I got my hands full. Do you have non-animal predators or crimes in these areas? So I'm assuming the question you're asking is, do we get deployed like looking for missing people that may be subject to a crime? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Like, if there's a missing child or a missing person, we get called in for those. And again, we're pretty careful about those searches. Again, searcher safety is our primary requirement. So, if we think that there's somebody that has, that's out there that has a gun, and that happened on one of the searches up in the Northern Sierra where one of the searchers got shot. And we suspended that search immediately. Like it's not okay for searchers to be in that kind of area. So that's kind of what we're after. Let's see. Somebody said, thank you for the presentation, and you're welcome.
There was a question up the chat about you
I'm
referred
sorry.
to 10 essentials. What are they?
Oh, sorry. So if you look online, you'll see the 10 essentials. I mean, a map, a compass, warm clothes, some food. So this is just basic stuff that if you're going to go out into the wilderness for sure. But I got to say that, and maybe that's because I've been doing search and rescue. Even when I go out for a day hike, I assume I do kind of crazy day hikes. So maybe I should preface it with that. But I assume that I'm not going to make it back that day. So, if you think about it, and you're thinking like, okay, I'm going to be out overnight with a sprained ankle. What should you take? And, that's kind of what drives the 10 essentials. I mean, I can list the whole list, but the easiest thing is to look them up. There's plenty. If you just look for 10 essentials, you can't miss it. Bivy sacks, there's gossamer gear. And there's a bunch of people that make, inexpensive bivy. The one I is kind of like super light, but once you undo it, you could probably use it 2 or 3 times, but you're not going to basically, use it on a long-term basis. Is there a physical test for searchers? What age can someone become a searcher? So BAMRU basically is 18 and up. Marin County has a program for teenagers. So they've got, I'm not sure, maybe it's 12 or 14. I'm not sure exactly the age range. We don't have in BAMRU, we don't have a physical test per se, but we train every weekend and we kind of weed out people that aren't physically fit. Some of the units, San Mateo County has another search and rescue, kind of our sister search and rescue team, and they have a physical test that they do. And so once a year it's an annual test that you have to pass. So different teams work different ways. So I think so there's any other questions I haven't answered? The last thing I was going to say is if you're interested in joining a team, you can go online, you can look up BAMRU. You can also just look up search and rescue teams, and they're kind of in your local area. In San Mateo County, we've got San Mateo County Search and Rescue, which I know is a little confusing because BAMRU is this sort of larger Bay Area unit, but they're both sponsored by the Sheriff's Office. And SMC SAR is a type 2. So it's a little less extreme, but it's also an easier place to start if you're interested in search and rescue. Okay, anything else, folks?
A couple questions in the Q&A popping in.
Okay, sorry. Where are most of the searches, mountains or the flatlands? Well, I'm in a mountain rescue unit, so ours are mostly in the mountains and mostly, to be honest, outside the county of San Mateo. Because we typically get called in on the mutual aid searches, and that's what we train for. So we train for mountain stuff, but when the sheriff needs us locally, we work locally. San Mateo County Search and Rescue basically works in the flats and in the local mountains, and then does some mutual aid as well. Did I miss any other questions? Oh, here we go. What are your top 3 classes? Boy, I don't, that's a good question. I mean, it's hard for me to say these days. You know, the Sierra Club used to have some stuff that was good. So if you check your local Sierra Club chapter, REI's got some classes. And you can, you know, read stuff. It really depends on what you're going to do. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, there's hiking on trails. There's hiking on trails that have a lot of people. There's doing cross country. There's doing mountaineering. There's doing rock climbing. I mean, there are a lot of different levels that you can get involved in. And obviously the harder the stuff is, the more training you should get. And, you know, one thing that I recommend is find some other people that do it and do it with them. You know, find some people that, you know, are doing it. Don't, like, the idea of sort of Nike's just doing, you know, where it's like, well, you know, I went out and bought an ice axe and crampons and, you know, I just climbed up this 80-degree, you know, ice chute. That's really not a good idea. That's the way people get killed. And a YouTube video is not going to give you the experience of going with somebody who's done it before and can say, you know, we got the equipment, but here's where, you know, things are starting to get to be sketchy, and when to turn back. And, you know, that stuff you gain with experience. And I think we've all had close calls, and it's the close calls that teach you where the limits are. And you're not gonna learn those by looking at a YouTube video. All right, are people who are found typically evacuated, or will surgery sometimes be done in the wilderness? Wow, I've never been involved in anything where surgery is done in the wilderness. All our stuff is typically evacuated. Most of the time we do helicopter evacuations, particularly in the mountains where, you know, we can get to an open area. So, you know, we'll scout out someplace where we can land a helicopter, and we'll bring them in. And the reason we do that is somebody who's, you know, been out for days, we really want to get them into critical care as quickly as we can. Sometimes you can't get a helicopter, you got weather, you've got other things that are interfering with that. One of the things that we have in our unit is a litter, which is basically a basket you can put somebody in, but it's got a huge wheel on it. I mean, the wheel is, you know, the wheel's about 6 inches wide. It's like a huge mountain bike tire, and that clamps onto the bottom of the stretcher, and we're able to then wheel them out. But I got to tell you, I mean, that takes a big team to do it. You know, that you're a minimum of 6 people on the litter at any time, and you can only operate that litter, especially in rough terrain, for, you know, 10, 15 minutes before you got to rotate out. So, you know, anytime we can get to a landing site and call the helicopter in, that's what we do. If we're close and we can evacuate somebody and get an ambulance in, that's the next best thing.
There's a question from Gene about, are there team members that only do comms?
So in San Mateo County, there is a group that does comms and brings a comms rig to some of our search and rescue stuff. But I don't consider them search and rescues per se. They're kind of auxiliary. So yes, there is that level. but typically, at least most of the people that are in search and rescue, and again, I'm in type 1, so for the stuff that we do, the answer is no. I mean, everybody in our unit is technical, trains, and is extremely both physically fit and very proficient at what they do. Unpaid professionals, as we like to say. Okay, there's a question here. It says avalanche rescue, especially do we do that? So that is one of our areas. So we do high angle, which is rock. We do snow and ice, and we do wilderness. So we definitely do avalanche rescue. Now, the reality with avalanche rescue is a lot of avalanche rescue is going to be recovery unless you're there. I mean, somebody's got at most 30 minutes. And in California, with the weight of the snow, we've got very dense snow here. It's probably like 10 minutes. So if your team doesn't rescue you, you're probably in trouble. You still call for help if you're near a resort, like if you're in the backcountry in a resort where they can get to you quickly, then maybe. But that is the reality. The best thing you can do in terms of avalanche preparedness is to take AVI classes. There's AVI 1 and AVI 2, and be with people who have taken the courses. You need avalanche beacons, you need probes, you need shovels, and you need to know how to use that equipment. Okay, anything else? Did I miss anything, Mark?
No, Craig, that was excellent. Very informative. I think we really appreciate you taking the time. I certainly answered a lot of questions there. That's amazing. So thank you everybody for attending. This was really great. Please note that it will be on our YouTube channel, so you can share it or go back and look at it. And we'll send out that link to anybody that registered through Eventbrite. Also, our website, WPV-CERT.org, has the links as well. So you can always go there to find things.
And one thing I wanted to say is, thank you for everybody, for joining, but also for being part of CERT. I've talked about search and rescue, which is a little bit different, but it's having our communities prepared, which is really critical. And the fact that you're all doing that is terrific. So, I want to say, shout out to all of you as well. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds great. We're going to shut it down. Thanks, guys.
Shut it down. Take care.